Peppa and George were building a castle in the sandbox. The sand beneath their feet trembled. Suddenly, holes appeared in the ground. Dark, sticky pits. A black tentacle grabbed George's dinosaur. The holes vanished instantly. The sand felt cold, heavy. Round mounds started to rise all around. One of them opened, revealing a black, sandy mouth full of teeth. Peppa grabbed George and they ran toward the house. The mouth growled behind them. Waves of sand rippled under their feet. Evening. The backyard. Shadows were growing longer. From a new hole, George's dinosaur crawled out, covered in shiny black sand, its red eyes glowing. The toy turned its head and looked at Peppa. The dinosaur's teeth had turned black. All the sandy patches in the yard began to stir. Tentacles of black sand stretched out toward the children. The entire yard became a sea of moving black sand. A giant faceless figure emerged. In its mouth, absolute darkness. Peppa and George ran into the house. On the walls, a flickering reflection appeared. Behind Peppa stood 1,000 barely visible sandy hands. Peppa slammed the door shut. George was crying. Black sand tapped against the glass and crept up the walls of the house. Soon it began slipping under the door. Grains of sand fell from the ceiling onto Peppa's shoulder. She ran to the kitchen. The hourglass on the table flipped over, and the sand inside turned black. In the window's reflection, Peppa saw her own face, but her eyes were filled with black sand. The walls began to form a shifting message, written in sand. "You will not leave." Peppa returned to the hallway. A shadow flickered. George was standing there, but without a face and with eyes made of black grains. In the corner of the room, the sand gathered into a tall arch, through which distant laughter could be heard, though no one was laughing. Peppa walked into the store. Miss Rabbit was standing by a vending machine, fixing something. Pay attention to the mirror on the wall. In its reflection, a different Miss Rabbit. Black eyes, a mouth stretched ear to ear, black liquid dripping from the corners. Peppa said anxiously,
Miss Rabbit, something's not right.
Miss Rabbit approached the mirror. In her reflection, the same terrifying smile. Her face briefly aligned with the reflection. Black eyes, a wide grin.
Trick of the light, haha.
She said casually. Peppa noticed a mirrored jewelry box on the counter. It was empty inside, the bottom made of mirror. But in the mirror of the box, not Peppa's reflection, but writhing black tendrils reaching downward. It wasn't a window, it was a door. Peppa dropped the box and shattered it. Black liquid seeped from the shards, and thin tendrils crawled out of it. They slowly reached for Peppa's legs. Panicked, Peppa ran deeper into the store and leapt into a dark back room, slamming the door shut. On the back wall, a large antique mirror covered with a dusty cloth. The cloth twitched as if someone were breathing behind it. Suddenly, it flew off by itself. In the mirror, not Peppa, but a distorted version of her. Black eyes, a wide, unnatural smile. Tendrils burst from the mirror, gripping the frame. The reflected Peppa reached a hand through the mirror. Her fingers dripped with black liquid. The real Peppa slowly walked forward, eyes wide. She wasn't moving on her own. There was the sound of glass cracking, distorted Peppa laughter, the rustle of tendrils. Peppa stepped out of the back room. She was smiling, but her eyes flashed red for a split second. A black drop slid from the corner of her mouth, a shard of mirror on the floor. In it, the same horrifying reflection of Peppa flickering. Peppa experienced terrible nightmares every night. She told her mother about them. Then her mother opened an old dusty jewelry box and found an ancient pendant. This is a magical thing. It protects children from bad dreams and evil creatures, she explained. Receiving the gift, Peppa immediately put it on before going to bed. But that night she was again haunted by a terrifying nightmare. In her dream, she saw George, who had turned into a disgusting monster with bulging eyes, long claws, and sharp teeth. Thick green slime dripped from George's mouth as he slowly approached her, emitting a disgusting hissing sound. In the morning, Peppa told her mother everything, but she remained indifferent, repeating that the pendant would definitely work. The next night, the nightmares grew stronger and more realistic. She found herself in a dark corridor of her house, dimly lit by flickering bulbs. Suddenly, the figure of her father appeared, but he had transformed into a huge pig monster with dark red eyes, a long neck, terrifying claws, and crooked teeth. The creature approached Peppa, growling loudly. Waking up in the middle of the night, Peppa discovered she was alone in her bedroom. Her father was gone. When Peppa tried to take off the jewelry, it suddenly came to life and began stretching out, transforming into a chain of countless eyes, mouths, and limbs trying to grab her with their tentacles. Terrified, Peppa screamed and ran into another room. There, she encountered George. His body had stretched into a shapeless mass covered with numerous toothed mouths and claws. Peppa shouted and ran into the living room. But there she was, met by George and her father. Peppa ran back to her room, trying to hide from them. Suddenly, the walls trembled. Furniture started moving on its own, and a voice from nowhere whispered,
"The pendant didn't protect you because I created it. I made it to lure you into a trap of eternal nightmares."
Horrified, Peppa saw her mother enter the room, but she was now covered with many eyes, hands, and legs, with a frightening, distorted grimace on her face. Peppa was about to run away when the door slammed shut. The lights went out. A heartbreaking scream escaped Peppa's lips as the monster's mocking laughter echoed around her. The family was walking along an empty shoreline. Peppa and George were collecting shells. The white beam of the lighthouse slid across the shore. It suddenly turned bright red. The beam fell onto the sand a meter away from George. The spot of sand under the beam instantly blackened. A vortex formed. The sand hissed as it was drawn downward. Tentacles burst out of the vortex. They resembled crystals but were flexible and sticky. The tentacles reached toward George. One wrapped around his ankle. George screamed. He tried to pull his leg away. The lighthouse began to blink chaotically. The beam holding George grew brighter. George stopped resisting. His eyes became glazed over. He walked toward the vortex with mechanical steps. Dad and Mom rushed toward George. Their movements suddenly slowed down. The skin on their faces started to lose color, turning gray. Peppa ran after them, shouting. The red lighthouse beam found Dad and Mom. It trembled over them. The vortex expanded. Black tentacles stretched toward new victims. Peppa overtook her parents, rushing toward the lighthouse staircase. She had to stop the light. The red beam slid after her, striking the nearby cliff. Peppa burst into the round room at the top. A giant lens of the lighthouse occupied one wall. In the center stood a control panel with an old handle. In the corner, blending with shadows, sat the keeper. His face was hidden beneath a hood. The keeper muttered softly. His voice was hoarse like the sound of surf in a shell. Peppa ran up to the control panel. Suddenly, the keeper lifted his head sharply. Shadows in the room thickened around him. Don't turn off the light. Peppa pulled on the handle with all her might. The keeper lunged at her. Shadows behind him stretched out like tentacles. The blood-red lighthouse beam went out. Darkness reigned for a moment. Then the beam flared back to life, blindingly black. Not light, but absence of light ripping through the night from the lens. Peppa ran out onto a narrow balcony surrounding the room. The black beam struck down at the shore below. She looked down. On the beach, in the center of the black beam, stood Dad, Mom, and George, their figures faintly glowing with a dull gray light. A huge black vortex pulsed on the sand beneath them. Black tentacles burst from the vortex. They wrapped around Dad's, Mom's, and George's legs, pulling downward. Suddenly, the lighthouse's red beam jerked sharply, aiming directly at Peppa on the balcony above her. Shadows on the balcony thickened. They stretched out from corners toward Peppa.